Do you struggle with asking good questions? Do you often wish that you could find out more about a person or some facts, but you're always wondering, what are some good questions to ask? I don't know what to ask. Well, this is the video for you, because in this video, I want to share with you, how do you ask good questions? What is the process of thinking so that you can have better questions and therefore have better conversation? But first and foremost, we have to have a distinction. What is a good question anyway? What constitutes a good question versus a bad question? So I want to give you this distinction, because now we know what we're working towards. When it comes to a good question, the essence of that is a query. It is a query where the intention is to seek out novel information towards a particular objective. And the objective could be that you want to coordinate action within a team. It could be that you want to advocate for yourself or advocate for a project, or it could be simply that you want to satisfy your curiosity. So there is an objective to seeking out that information, and that is the essence of what a good question does, and what it is simply a query. So with that in mind, let's move forward and let me share with you the steps on the process in coming up with good questions. You see, in school and in the education system, we were taught how to answer questions. We were taught how to answer questions on tests, exams, in the classroom, in front of the lab managers, and also in front of our teachers and professors. And we were told that by answering questions correctly, the more correct answers you can come with for questions that are asked of you, the more intelligent we are. That was the definition of smart or intelligent, was how many correct answers did we get, or how many questions did we get right. And it's unfortunate, because that programming caused a subconscious belief that intelligence equals answering questions correctly, and coming up with good answers is intelligent. Well, here's what I say. While being able to answer questions is smart, being able to come up with questions is genius, because questions are your answers. You see, questions facilitates more learning, it facilitates discovery, and it facilitates positive change and meaningful contribution, right? So that leads to the first step on what's the process in coming up with good questions. This now leads to the first step. And the first step is to approach with genuine curiosity. I mentioned before that, learning, it facilitates learning. Asking good questions facilitates discovery. So when it comes to approaching with genuine curiosity, this is where you know that if knowledge is power, then asking questions is a superpower, right? If knowledge is going to help you with creating a career path and opportunities, then being able to ask questions is going to be a greater superpower. So I would encourage you to start with mapping out your knowledge. When you map out your knowledge, this is where you can either create a mind map or some sort of a written representation of your expertise, right? So then, therefore, you can have conscious clarity of what you know, right? The depth of your knowledge in various domains. So you create a mind map for yourself. And in doing so, this is where you realize where the boundaries of your knowledge base is. And the more you realize, the more you start to explore and expand your knowledge base, a funny thing happens. You realize the more you don't know. Or have you noticed that? When you're curious about a certain subject area and you go to do more research and you start to discover more information, to start to discover more facts and data, the more your knowledge base expands. But here's the thing, the more you know, the more you really are developing, honing your knowledge and deepening your knowledge, the more you realize, oh my goodness, there's so much more that I still don't know. Right? It's in that journey that we realize what we don't know, and we become conscious of what we don't know. It's in that awareness, that conscious awareness of what I don't know. Now I know what I don't know. This is how you can approach it with genuine curiosity. So now you can begin to ask yourself, well, what do I want to know now? What are some areas that I don't know in this domain? What do I wish to know? How do I wish to close some of my existing or the knowledge gaps that now I'm aware of? So approach this with genuine curiosity. Start with what you know, and that will uncover what you don't know. And this is the basis of formulating great questions. Step number 2 is to analyze the conversational goal. In other words, what is the goal of this particular conversation? Right? Because you want to ask good questions in that conversation. And it doesn't matter. It could be a conversation one-on-one or one-to-many. No matter what, there is a goal for that conversation. So really start to analyze, what is that goal? Because you see, any goal in a conversation rely on a spectrum And the spectrum is going to go from altruism to narcissism. And that is the spectrum of all conversational goals, right? What do I mean by that? Altruistic. If the goal tends towards altruism, it means that then you want to give away your knowledge. You want to cooperate and coordinate and cooperate with other people so that you can accomplish something together. Right? So that's more of an altruistic goal. It's cooperative. It tends to be more cooperative. If that's the conversational goal and it tends towards that direction, then the way that you ask good questions is to start with open-ended questions. Right? You start with open-ended questions because now when you ask something that's open-ended versus something that's closed and only provides a yes or no answer, something open-ended, you're inviting them to respond as they are. You're inviting them to be who they are, to provide their knowledge, right? To be able to be authentic in that conversation and to be able to think for themselves as themselves, right? So that's really a great way to build trust and to build rapport as well, and to really create an open environment where you're accepting of who they are in their response. And the second strategy, if the conversational goal tends towards altruism, is to really start with the lesser sensitive questions, right? Because chances are, remember, asking good questions has an intention to seek novel information. But sometimes when you want to retrieve certain information, it could be quite sensitive to retrieve that information from your listeners. So this is where you want to have questions. You might need to ask questions that are sensitive for the other person to answer. But don't start there. Start with the questions that are least sensitive and work your ways towards more sensitive questions. So I'll give you an example of that, right? A sensitive question could be, have you ever in your career path thought about sabotaging your coworkers' projects? Right? So that's a very sensitive topic, right? If you're doing a research or some user experience and you want to ask very sensitive questions because the information is important to you, then you want to leave that for later until you've built rapport. So you start with a less sensitive question. So a less sensitive question could sound something like what is the most inspired project that you've worked on? Right? Or have you ever felt that your project was underappreciated? Have you ever had that experience? So that's a lesser sensitive question than the other one around have you ever thought about sabotaging your coworker's project? Right? So start with the least sensitive question, work your way up, and ask open-ended questions. If the goal of the conversation tends towards more cooperative or altruistic goals. Now, sometimes the goal of the conversation lends itself to more narcissism, which means I want to gain something out of this for my own interest. I want to gain some knowledge. I want to gain some data or some secret or insider information so that I can use them towards my own personal goals, right? So that's more of a narcissistic goal. Now, if it tends towards that, if the conversation tends toward that, then the strategy is different, right? In this case, understand that because the goal towards narcissism is now more competitive versus cooperative. And because of the competitive nature of the goals, it tends towards responses from other people that may be more elusive, or they might want to dodge the question or give you a roundabout answer but not really addressing the question, or some of them might even lie. And so that's why the strategy here is different compared to cooperative goals. In this case, instead of asking open-ended questions, because open-ended questions allow more wiggle room to dodge it or to give open or roundabout answers or not directly responses. So open-ended questions lend itself towards those types of responses. So instead, in this case, try asking more direct, closed loop questions that tend towards short answers or yes-no answers. That way, there's not a lot of wiggle space for them to dodge it or to take you around and around or to answer a different question. If it's direct, yes or no, there's no way to go off on a tangent. And that way, you're still getting information. And if you ask multiple of these questions, you can still glean the information you need. So that's step number one. And the other thing is to be able to position your questions in kind of like a reverse psychology experience. So here's what I mean by that. Reverse psychology, where the assumption that you're asking in that question, it assumes a negative outcome, a little bit more of a pessimistic outcome. So here's what I mean by that. An example of a question that assumes a pessimistic or a negative outcome could be something like, well, this probably is not that important to you right now, is it? Right? I'm assuming that this goal is not really important to you. This project is not really important to you right now, is it? Or you can say something like, with the new policies coming in, your teams were going to be at capacity and you're going to be needing new hires soon, am I right? Right, so you see what I mean? The nature of those questions is a reverse psychology, assuming on the pessimistic side of the outcome. And with that type of a question, the other person tends to be more formulative in their discussions. They tend to be more giving of responses when you frame questions that way. Now, of course, I've just shared with you 2 examples. And of course, just 2 examples from extreme. If the goal of the conversation tends to be more cooperative versus more competitive. And I've just given you 2 examples, but of course, in life and in career, there's so many nuances with that. And if you find yourself in a quite complicated, a complex environment, which is true because nowadays people are working virtually, teams are more diverse, there's other cultures involved, different communication styles, different views towards trust and so on. And this creates a very complex landscape. And if you want to be able to develop a skill set to navigate that effectively so that you can be always leading the conversation with great questions, being able to advocate for yourself and present clearly and having your ideas be heard and understood and respected, if you want to create that success for yourself, then I invite you to work with me. Every week, I lead a class on mastering your communications, asking great questions, speaking impromptu and on the spot, and also strategies for navigating complex personal landscapes in terms of other people having different perspectives. What do you do? What do you say? And how do you navigate that? So if you're curious and you are not curious but serious to create these results for yourself, then I invite you to book a call. Below this video in the description, there's a link for you to talk to myself or a member of my team. And this is just an initial discussion to explore whether or not it's the right fit for you and if I can genuinely help you with what you're looking for. If so, then I look forward to working with you on the inside and helping you develop these skill sets so that you can advance your career, create an inspiring life, and also inspiring relationships. So I look forward to talking to you on the inside. And the last step is step number 3, and that is to avoid the interrogation experience. How do you know what I mean? Right? When people ask questions and you just feel like they're interrogating you, and it does not feel good. It feels like literally like a police interrogation. It feels like you're being a spy. It does not feel good. It does not build rapport. And the person who feels that way often clams up and they want to stop the conversation. They're constantly looking for a way out. So you don't want to be the person to create that experience for someone else. So I'm going to give you some 3 very practical ways on how to avoid giving that experience as though you're trying to interrogate someone, right? So here's the first strategy. It is the cadence of the way of your questions. The cadence, meaning the rhythm at which you're asking them. Right? If you really look at interrogation, it's like a rapid fire, right? Where do you live? What is your name? What is your last name? What is your social insurance number? Right? It's a rapid fire question, and that particular cadence lends itself more towards an experience of interrogation. So be aware of your cadence. The second thing is the continuity of your questions. Right? So if your follow-up questions, you have an initial question and every question after that is a follow-up question. If your follow-up questions have continuity with the previous one, then there's no reason that the other person will feel there's an interrogation. It's only when there's no continuity that that experience of interrogation is really at its height. Right? When you think about this a little bit more, if I were to ask you about your career, and then the next thing I ask you is about your relationships, and then the next thing I ask you is about your a great project that you're working on, right? And then the next thing I ask you is something really personal, and they don't seem to have continuity. It kind of feels like an interrogation, and it doesn't feel like there's a direction or a clear objective or some clear, fair exchange going on, and that's what creates the red flags. And finally, there's the casualness of your inquiry. How do you show up? What's your tonality, right? And what are the vocabulary? What's the words that you are using? The casualness of it. If you are more casual versus official or formal, people are more likely to open up, especially if you give them an out. Right? Kind of tell them that I'm going to ask you a few questions here, but feel free anytime if you want to change your answer, give them that freedom to change their answer anytime they want throughout the conversation, so that you're giving them an out. Right? So the casualness of it really influences whether or not they feel that this is kind of like an interrogation that will cause them to clam up. Right? So those are the 3 steps to asking great questions, having better conversations, and I want to hear from you. Comment below. What are your key takeaways? How are you going to come up with great questions from this point forward? What are you going to implement next at your next meeting or at the next time you have a conversation? And if you haven't done so already, remember to subscribe to my channel as well. Ring that bell so you can receive a notification every time I release a new video.